Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're talking about a topic so many of you wrestle with daily: the educational needs and school-related issues for your child. As a former teacher, a psychologist, and a mom, I have empathy for everyone on all sides of the equation when it comes to dealing with the very real practical issues of supporting all learners in a school environment. There are no easy answers, especially when it comes to kids with more significant dysregulation and needs, and especially in the context of the world that we're living in today and the needs that all kids have coming into school. What I do know is that we all need to be committed to working together to address these things and to have compassion for the players on all sides. Someone who shares my passion for this and understands firsthand as both a professional and mom all of the pieces of this is my guest today, Dr. Emily King. We're going to explore how best to advocate for our kids while also supporting the teachers and other professionals who are working with them. Let me give you a little bit of info about Dr. Emily. She's a child psychologist in Raleigh, North Carolina, who has worked with neurodivergent children and teens for the last 20 years. She received a PhD in school psychology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and has worked as a school psychologist in Houston, Texas before starting her private practice in Raleigh. Dr. Emily is passionate about empowering parents and teachers to take care of their own mental health so they can be the best guide for their children and teens as they parent and educate. She and her husband are parents to two energetic boys, ages 8 and 14. I know many of you can relate to that. She's also the founder of Learn with Dr. Emily, where she shares online resources related to raising and educating neurodivergent youth beyond her psychology practice. She's been featured on lots of TV shows, has written for numerous publications. You can find her on social media, which is actually where she and I first connected, on Instagram. Go follow her there. She's amazing. In addition to her email newsletter and lots of other resources she has available. Dr. Emily, welcome to the show. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
So much to dive in around this topic. This could be like a series of episodes. I would love for you to frame it up a little bit by just sharing your story of how you came to be a child psychologist, particularly focused on neurodivergent kids and the issues with them in school. Talk to us about how that came about for you.
Yeah, so this takes me all the way back to being a student myself. I was a really quote unquote good student, as in I did what I was told and jumped through all the hoops I needed to jump through. And school came naturally for me in terms of organization and doing what was expected. I loved school. I found safety in the routine of school. And I didn't struggle with it. There were times where, there's certain classes, of course, we all have those classes. Mine was chemistry, that were not my deal, right? Not my deal. But in general, I enjoyed school. And then as I went on, I just really loved working with children. I thought I was going to be a teacher. And I discovered in my psychology classes that I really loved learning. And I loved the psychology behind learning. And then I started to notice that not everyone learned like I learned, and not everyone was able to follow the pattern in education we're given to jump through the hoops to get the degrees to move forward. So I actually went straight into graduate school after college. And then went straight into practicums and internship and postdoc and then working as a school psychologist. So as that evolved, I, of course, as a school psychologist, did a lot of evaluations, did a lot of identifications of IEPs and coming up with goals. And that's when I was working in Texas. And then moved back home to North Carolina, where school psychologists mainly just do testing. And by that point, I had really fallen in love with the therapy side of things, and working with all the behavioral and emotional things that are also getting in the way of learning. At this point, somewhere in there, I also had my first son. So he was 2 when we moved back to North Carolina and started my private practice. And we started to see some concerns with his development. And so I will just say, anyone listening who's a professional, a teacher, a therapist, a nurse, any type of professional that knows things and then goes through an emotional experience of raising a child that you know what to do, but you emotionally are still on that same path of acceptance and pivoting and trying to figure out the best way to support the child right in front of you. So I was a psychologist before having children. So I had this kind of marriage of the two lanes that I was kind of going parallel into, my parenthood as well as my career. So there were many things I learned in graduate school and practicum work and internship that helped me know what to do. And then I feel like my son taught me all of the just emotional mental health functioning ways of how to do it and why it's so important and why we have to have connection and why we can't do any of the things we've learned in school or we know until we have all of that connection, safety underneath it all. So I'm very passionate for both of those reasons. And I think that's why when I talk to parents and teachers, I always come back to, but are we capable of doing the strategies? We know the strategies, but are we capable of showing up and doing the things that's going to make this role sustainable for us in a healthy way so that we can continue being connected to our child and they can continue feeling safe within the relationship with us.
So important. And I think, that's become probably the biggest or one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge right now in schools and for education professionals is it's not just kids identified as having special needs or labels who are coming in right now, needing more of those foundations of connection and felt safety and all of that in order to learn. It's the vast majority of kids, if not arguably all of them, because of the world we live in, because of the last couple of years. And that can be a real, it can be a real challenge. As you said, the understanding of it, the helping educators understand the why of that, the need to connect first, that's the easy part. The part that becomes more difficult is how do we actually implement these things in an educational world where most of the time teachers don't have a lot of say and control, where the powers that be dictate very different priorities than these foundations that we're talking about. And that really does impact then the mental health and well-being of the people who are trying to meet the needs of our kids in their classrooms, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think so many of our teachers feel like they're all alone out there thinking, well, I know relationships are really important, but I'm asked to do PBIS. I'm asked to follow the data. And the data is incredibly important to access services, to track progress. But there are ways that we can do the data alongside building the relationship. And I think that's one of the things I'm most passionate about is helping teachers look at what they are required to do and expected to do and tweaking the things that we can that are in their control. And there are many things that we can tweak to work on collaboration with parents, to work on, pivoting a certain task that's going to hook in a child's engagement and get a better outcome for learning. And it was just a little tweak that we could make. So all of these things, like you said, are completely case by case basis. Every child is different. And it did used to be that we had, our general curriculum, or we have our general curriculum for everyone in regular education. And then we have individualized education plans for everyone in special education. But then there's also a lot of kids who can't access the generalized curriculum without some sort of accommodation or without feeling safe at school. And there are a lot of kids that don't feel safe at school right now. Yeah. And that doesn't mean they need an IEP. Right. It means that they need to feel safe in their classroom. So I do expect that there's going to be somewhat of a lag in timing of like some of the things that we are talking about and these idea-based things and even the research behind it. It's going to take a little while for legislators and funding and administrators to catch up with these things. But I feel like this is my life's work to keep talking about this so that we can make forward progress and help teachers feel like they can make an impact, even though they are working within sometimes a fairly rigid system of expectations.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing, right? Because, okay, we want to help kids feel safe and feel connected because literally those are the foundations neurologically that are required for higher level learning. And yet the things that are dictated as what the priorities are in our school environments are things like, the worksheets, the academic expectations, these pieces that you literally can't help kids access and get to when we're not addressing those foundations. And yet we're not providing the supports, the infrastructure, the things to allow our schools to do that. And so I just see, I don't know how you feel about it, but I felt like we've been moving progressively faster and faster towards this tipping point where it simply is not going to be sustainable anymore for our education department and schools on a micro level to be operating the way they have, because the needs of children and the needs of what's going on in our society are just too great at this point. There's just too big of a gap and a mismatch.
Right. And we saw that coming out of the pandemic. And one thing I've been preaching this school year is that, when we hear like, oh, kids are behind, there's a lag in skills. Of course, there's a lag in skills. There was a lack of probably, quality instruction for a variety of reasons and to no one's fault. Like this is no pointing fingers. This is just the reality we've been living in. And I've really challenged people to think about what's the goal here? Like, what's our timeline? If your child needs to take a gap year, let's take a gap year. If your child needs that extra year to learn to read because they were, remote through first grade, then let's do it. So I think in some communities, we're funneling a lot of pressure and funding and like summer instruction. I don't know if that's the answer. I'm not a fan. I think that kids need to go play this summer. I've said that every summer for the past 3 summers, especially. We need to connect and play and recover from the stress that has happened. Kids' brains will heal. Kids' brains will come back and connect with teachers. The most important thing we can do right now is to help teachers and parents and children feel like they want to learn, like they want to come back to school in August, like they want to come back and say, okay, I want to do this again. I'm in my next grade. I can do this. So those are things to keep in mind when you're making decisions kind of on the ground. If you're an administrator or a teacher or a parent, is troubleshooting. What is your goal here? I mean, what is it? Is it about a skill for your child? Is it about a life skill? Is it about emotional regulation skill? Knowing that they won't be able to do any of that higher level learning until we establish, the foundation of feeling safe and feeling connected, which is often how we need to start every school year, by that parent-teacher collaboration and working together to help the student get off to a good start.
There's several things I want to get into, but let's go with that a minute, just even to help really solidify for our listeners. We're talking about the importance of kids feeling safe, feeling connected, those relational pieces. And I think there are a lot of people in the parent realm, but certainly in the educational realm, because people who go into education, unfortunately, are not given courses and training in a lot of these things. There's a lack of understanding about why that's critical, right? The thought process that is perpetuated, at least in the United States, and I know in many other countries as well, is, well, if a kid is having behavior problems, learning disability, isn't learning, isn't getting their, academics down, then the solution is to do more intensive academics. The solution, as you said, we have a gap in skills because of COVID. Well, we're going to put everybody in, tutoring over the summer. Or the key is, if you're struggling with math and you're throwing a tantrum and ripping your paper every time, the key is to give you one-on-one instruction in math. And yet the data bears out that way of approaching it is not helping and is not working. So I'd love to have you just sort of summarize for listeners, when we're talking about this important foundation of safety, of connection, from a brain standpoint, why is that important? Why does that foundation have to be there?
Right. And you and I both know from neuroscience, if we are not feeling safe and connected, we then cannot allow learning to happen, because learning is a vulnerable experience. Learning is scary, on a small level scary. To a child who is faced with a really hard math problem, and math is really hard for them, their nervous system is getting alerted to a danger of some kind. And this is different for every student. And it's, potentially not going to meet a traumatic level of danger. But for some students, when we see students shut down, or we see behaviors escalate, this is a student's nervous system going into fight, flight, or freeze when they're faced with an expectation that dysregulates them, and they don't have the foundation of support to regulate. So the reason that the relationship is so important is what we talk about all the time, which is co-regulation. So for anyone who isn't familiar, my best analogy for this is just rocking the baby. When we rock the baby, we know what to do instinctively. But there are 5, 6, 7-year-olds that need to be quote unquote rocked, still in school. And that is getting to know them. That is maybe having a joke when you come in. Conscious discipline strategies do a great job with this, of morning greetings and morning meetings, and having that safety connection routine where a child's foundation is safe. It primes them for, this is a safe room, this is a safe space, my peers in here are also learning. So when I'm faced with a task that's hard for me, which is everything that's new in school is at some point a little bit hard for kids, I feel safe trying. I feel safe making a mistake. I feel safe guessing. Lots of teachers will say, you need to guess 2 times, and then you need to ask a peer, and then you come and get my help. So lots of teachers have a class-wide strategy, but those kids have to be able to feel confident and vulnerable. And then on top of that, there could be some social anxiety coming in. There could be some inattention coming on board that makes a child realize, I can't focus on what's in front of me. I know it and I could tell it verbally, but I can't write it. It could be a variety of things that could be activating that anxiety in a child, which is really just the dysregulation. So one great strategy that most teachers do in elementary school is kind of the all about me, get to know me worksheet at the beginning of the year, where the parent is filling something out. I recommend a little bit of a different version of this that I've created that I call the regulation roster. And what it is it's, I kind of break it down into 5 areas of I want a teacher to look at their roster, look at their class, observe them in the first few days of school, and ask the parents, and does this child like to move their body? Are they running and bouncing and standing while they're listening? Or does this student need to be really quiet to focus? Or does this student have to tell me their opinion before they can get going? Or are they really social, or they really need to know the plan because they're very, point A to point B? As teachers get to know their students, this all can be observed and organized before you even begin with the reading and writing and math. So I love for teachers to think about their students that way, to collaborate with parents, because parents will absolutely tell you, my child needs to move or they are not going to be able to focus. And it doesn't mean that they have ADHD. It could mean that they're 7 and their nervous system hasn't really settled into being a student yet. And it could mean that they have ADHD, and it kind of doesn't matter. The label is there to gain access to services. And then when kids are older, the label is there to help them form their identity of themselves and kind of associate as a person with, or I'm an autistic person, or however they want to identify. But all along the way in school, it's really more of the strengths and weaknesses we need to be noticing and adapting to. And it is literally an impossible job for our teachers to figure all of that out on their own, or for parents to figure all of that homework out on their own. Parents are not educators. So that's why we've just got to work together and just put all of our skills together especially when we're getting to know each other at the beginning of the year. Let our kids know, parents and teachers talk. Like, you don't have to worry about, communicating back and forth. We're on your team. We've got your back. So when things do come from home to school, it feels normal. It doesn't feel like anyone's in trouble. Those are things that we can talk in more detail about kind of when we do collect data on behavior and things like that. But that's why that regulation piece is so important to be the foundation, not just at the beginning of the year, but at the beginning of the day before any higher level education and instruction is going on.
Yeah, it's such an important point, because literally the way the brain's processing systems work, if there is a lack of felt security and connection, those higher level cognitive processes can't work. Like that's
Right.
the thing that people fail to understand, is what you're describing here, that without the foundations of the brain feeling safe, feeling connected, the brain literally will not then start to go into engagement mode around content and higher level thinking. And, I want to spotlight something around this issue of safety, because I get a lot of pushback, both from parents in the home setting, as well as educators in the school setting of, well, of course the kid's safe. Like there's nothing unsafe happening. Are you accusing me? Like I'm doing something unsafe in my classroom or my home? And it's like, no, wait a minute. This is about the child's or the person's perception of whether they're safe. And you gave some great examples of that, but I think that's just important to spotlight. Of course, we are not suggesting that you at home or the teachers at school are doing things that are inherently physically unsafe for the child. But kids have their own, each of them has their own experience of what feels safe and secure and connected to them. And especially our kids who are somewhere on, that neurodivergent, type of spectrum, they are going to be, by and large, even more sensitive to some of those perceived threats and things. And so I think that's an important piece for people to understand. Like it's that student's experience of whether they feel safe and connected or not.
And I can just give a quick example of that. If you have a student, a young elementary student who really does need to stand or wiggle their body while they're attending, and that's met with a very traditional, you need to be seated and look forward approach, that child begins to understand that they understand what's expected of them. It's hard for them. So they are habituated to having this feeling of, I have to get up and go to school and do something hard and sit there all day and try to listen. And for many kids, that takes all of their energy. And that's why a lot of kids will have like smooth mornings and rough afternoons, or they'll have a smooth school day and fall apart between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. They have left it all on the field, and they may not look like they're working hard, but they may be having dysregulation later. And so that's another reason parents and teachers have to communicate. Maybe we need to let the child have lots of movement breaks, stand while they work, as long as they're attending and as long as they're doing their work completion. That's what we're talking about in terms of, I'm not feeling safe. Really what it is I'm not feeling like my teacher is letting me be me and let my body do what I need to do within parameters of not disturbing everyone else. So, like, totally with you on that. But there's the kind of a range of flexibility we can give kids that will have a huge impact on helping them feel comfortable and connected and safe, because they're not spending so much energy regulating themselves. They're able to then use that higher order attention and focus, which is all getting hijacked by that emotional dysregulation when it's happening, but then it frees up that mental energy to do the learning.
And this is really why so many of the predominant approaches that are used in educational settings to address these kinds of behaviors are problematic, right? Because the typical response, like you just gave the example of the kid whose body and brain literally needs to move in order to regulate and learn. And when the expectation is, nope, sit in your seat, face forward, eyes on the board, and the kid's not doing it, the tendency, the typical approach then is to put the external, reinforcement systems in place, clip charts, you need to sit down and sit still and look at, what's on the screen, or I'm going to move your clip, or I'm going to put you on red, or, I'm going to call your mom, or whatever. These are the predominant strategies that are still used in educational setting, contrary to what we know from the research in several fields, child development, neuroscience, learning, all of that. Contrary to what we know is effective, these are still the prevailing methods. And so I'd love to have you comment on that, because I'm sure that you have run into that in all three of the realms of doing work as a school psychologist as a parent of a neurodivergent learner and in your private practice, helping families around that. So just interested in your thoughts on that, on those types of approaches.
Absolutely. So what this comes down to is internal versus external motivation. There is a place for external motivation and where it can be useful. And when I say external motivation, I mean the adult or the authority figure is going to reward for the child doing something expected, that's being expected of them. The only way that that will work and without making the child uncomfortable or potentially emotionally harming the child is if the child has the skill, but is not doing it maybe consistently or not doing it across settings, but the skill is pretty solid. So all they need to do is have a little bit of motivation and you're rewarding them for practice. They've got the skill, they can do it, they're confident, but they need, it's like the last little push. Where we don't want to use external motivation, which is kind of like everything else, is when there's a lagging skill. When you ask a child to sit, you'll get a sticker if you sit. That's external motivation. And you're making me actually ignore or avoid something that my nervous system needs right now. And then you're rewarding me for ignoring my body. And that's where we get into a problem and a negative feedback loop of, I don't like coming to school and I do it for stickers. And then at some point with some personalities, kids will start to buck the system because they get angry and they know that it's not working for them. And they're, they feel like they're not understood, which is, if we're getting dysregulated behavior, we really need to take it all the way back to what are the skills that the child has and what are the expectations. So in some of the work I do, I'll share this with you if anyone would like to see this visual. I created a visual where I'll just describe it because you can't see it, where it's like a ladder, and at the top of the ladder are the expectations, and at the bottom of the ladder are the child's skills. All of the space in between is anxiety. So the farther away the skill and the expectation are, that's the size of the anxiety we feel when we are faced with something to learn. Now, a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. We know this as mental health providers. We know this as, psychologists who have studied cognition. If we didn't have anxiety, I joke with kids, like, if we didn't have anxiety, you would see a bear in the woods and try to give it a high five. And they all think like, no, I wouldn't. Well, how do you know that? Right? How do you know not to walk out in the street? How do you know, to study for a test? Like, a little bit of worry about your performance or a little bit of worry, danger keeps us alive. The problem is when the expectation is so high and our skill is so low, that space in between is so massive that we shut down. So one of the things we can tweak as teachers is, and as parents, is to support the skill and adjust the expectation until the anxiety is tolerable, till it's in this like happy space, not necessarily happy, but tolerable space of, I'm motivated enough, like the anxiety creates motivation. I'm motivated enough to go to the next level. So the reason that I don't like clip charts is several reasons, but they tend to be uniform across the class and kids' skills are not uniform. So think about what I just said about adjusting the skill level. Someone over here is going to be on green all the time and they're actually never getting challenged. They may be getting reinforced just for showing up. Like, they're kind of like me in school. I did everything that was expected of me, right? And then you've got a kid that's never on green. So the fact that they're uniform is a problem. The fact that they're public is a problem, that everyone can see. And I get pushback on this a little bit from people because they're like, well, if, it's good peer pressure, right? Like the student over here is doing really well. So doesn't a student over here want to be like that student over there? Well, let's think about that student over there that is doing well, and how everyone's jealous of that student. Everyone is thinking, that student's the teacher's pet. There are all kinds of social ripple effects that are not positive of always being on green.
Well, it also assumes that the kid who's never on green doesn't already want to be like that. Of course they do.
Of course
Every
they do.
kid who's struggling wants to not be struggling. They don't need a public showing to say, look, you should be like this kid. They already want to be the kid on green.
Every kid wants to be on green. Every kid wants to be regulated.
Yes.
No kid wants to have a meltdown.
No.
They are in fight or flight or freeze when that happens, and they're not in control of themselves. And so the only way that that external motivation works is when the child is motivated to do the thing, and the external motivator is really just a reminder. Like, let's get into a new habit of doing this. You can do the skill, but let's do it every day. Let's maybe do it independently. You're tweaking something about it at the end.
Right.
Internal motivation is really what we want. We want a kid to come to school because they love learning. We want a kid to come to school because they feel comfortable and connected, and they feel like their teacher gets them. They feel like I'm not going to know everything, but when she gives me something to learn and I don't know, I know what to do. I know how to problem solve. I know I'm safe even when I make a mistake. And clip charts do not make you feel like that.
No. And also it assumes the underlying assumption with any of those types of systems used the way they're typically used. The assumption is that you know what you should be doing, you are capable of doing it, and you are choosing not to. And therefore,
none of those are true.
Well, that's right. And therefore, if I dangle either a reward or the threat of a punishment, you will then choose to do the thing that I want you to do. But you're exactly right. Those underlying assumptions are all false. Look, if kids knew what they should be doing and were capable of doing it in that moment, they would.
They would.
So the underlying premise of that is really problematic. And, I think this gets into the other big issue to touch on here, which is why teachers, educators more broadly continue to use these kinds of systems. And I think it really comes down to, number one, this is by and large how educators are trained.
Yes.
This is what their experience is. This is what's been modeled for them in their practicums and student teaching. This is how they have been taught, very outdated models of behaviorism, behavioral reinforcement, those types of things. And they're so stressed, burned out, overtaxed, undersupported that puts them in a situation of not feeling safe and supported, such that they could learn some new ways or explore how to implement that. And so I think really there are some very important parallels between what we're talking about on the kids side and what's happening on the adult teacher side. And I just would love your feedback on that.
Yes, you nailed it with that. That's why I do this work, is that it's like such an ironic situation staring us in the face, right? We have a dysregulated student we're trying to teach, but the teacher is so overwhelmed and stressed and dysregulated themselves. How are we expecting two dysregulated people, not just one, but two dysregulated people, generally speaking? The adult's going to be better able to mask it and kind of quote unquote suck it up and make it through the day. But two dysregulated people trying to create this safe space for nurture and learning, it's a recipe for just stagnation and just getting through the year. And, learning will not happen with that formula. No. So we have to start talking about teacher mental health. We're doing a great job, I feel like, talking about parental mental health, especially when children have more complex needs. But all classrooms at this point are neurodiverse classrooms. You'll have some neurodivergent kids in there, but they all come to the table with some difference in whether it's ability level or interest or personality or skill level. Teachers are having to look out at this really diverse group of kids intellectually, cognitively, interest-wise. And then they are given the standardized curriculum, and they know I've got to tweak this.
Right.
So when again, the expectation is too high for the skill, of course we get behavior, but you're absolutely right. Most teachers get maybe one behavioral course, or it's a course in usually behavioral management,
Right.
which is reactive. It's like, when you see this behavior, this is what you need to do to improve or squash or extinguish the behavior, which is behaviorism. What we are talking about is starting all the way at the beginning of the year, beginning of the relationship, kind of rebooting the whole thing and saying, what are these child skills? What are your skills as a teacher? And tweaking that, figuring it out. If you are honest about the fact that, let's say you have a really loud, bubbly personality and you are working with a very sensory sensitive child who needs, a quiet voice and needs you to slow down your speech, just for you to recognize that and work on that is huge for that student. And so that's something I've had to work on as a therapist. When I'm trained in DIR floor time, and there's a lot of floor time where you observe, you watch, you do not intervene. And I am a doer by nature. And I will never forget having to sit on my hands for the first, few months of my play therapy training, because you want to jump in and help. And you're watching the child try to problem solve and work out their social skills with problem solving. But a similar observation in the beginning of the school year of yourself as a teacher and an educator, and gathering information from the parent and observing what the child's nervous system is bringing to the table in terms of, I like to think about kids are just these little nervous systems walking into the school building. What do they need to ready themselves to learn? What do you need as an educator to ready yourself for another school year? And that's a big loaded question right now for our teachers.
Absolutely. And so I want to bring this is perfect. I want to bring this around to specifically the parents who are listening, how this is important for them on a practical level, because we just talked about how if you have a child who's dysregulated and struggling for whatever the reasons are in school, and you also recognize that the teachers, the staff members working with them are struggling, most of the time with their own overwhelmed dysregulation. Well, just like you as the parent don't want the teacher or whoever in school handling your child's dysregulation by being, setting unreasonable expectations, yelling at them, threatening them, whatever. If you approach the teachers, the administrators, the educators who are feeling dysregulated and unsafe and if you approach them by threatening and, being hostile, whatever, you're also not going to get very far. Nobody's needs get met there. And so I think the challenge for a parent then, and we've sort of talked through pieces of this for the kids and the educators, which is important for parents to understand. But then from a parent standpoint, how can parents use this understanding then to advocate for their kids, to work with the education professionals to help get their child's needs met? What are some of the things you think are important for parents around that?
Yeah, I always challenge parents to start with what is scary to them about their child either being dysregulated or acting out or getting sent home at school. What scares them about that? The answer I usually get is, well, what if they're doing this 10 years from now and they're, 15 years old and they're hitting people, which tends to not happen. If you have a 4-year-old that's a biter, at some point they develop. So sometimes I can help parents understand just the growth that happens in kids' nervous systems over time is huge, but some kids don't really learn how to be a student until they're 7 or 8. And so those years of 5, 6, 7 are hard for educators, for teachers, and for parents, because we are asking a child to do something that's too hard for their body, because we start standardized education at 5. So it's usually in that window of time that's the scariest for parents. Sometimes it can be later, into adolescence, but that's kind of a different podcast.
Right,
And
yeah.
so I always start with what's scary to you, because usually whatever is scaring the parent will send them into a need for control. And whenever they feel a need for control, when you go into these meetings and these interactions at school, as a person who's worked as a school psychologist and been a parent, no one ever feels open and collaborative when someone comes at them trying to control what they know and what they do. Mm-hmm. So the parent is the expert on the child, especially in the home environment. The teacher is the expert on students, on education, and then the most accurate reporter of what they see mm-hmm. in the school environment. And we have to bring those perspectives together and just be curious, mm-hmm. just like try to just push aside any defensiveness, any fear, and just be curious about, okay, why is it happening here and not at home? Or why is it happening in math and not in ELA? What's going on in the morning or the afternoon? Because until we can just figure it out and problem solve together, no one is getting helped. Mm-hmm. And a lot of meetings sometimes get very contentious, and time is spent building trust and not helping the child. And certainly we all need to build trust, but trust can be built outside the IEP meeting. Yeah. You do not want the first time you work with your teacher to be in the IEP meeting. Yeah. There's so much you can do in terms of, little things like, volunteering, collaborating, helping in the classroom, getting to know. And we haven't had enough of that, of course, in the last 2 years. But as we get back, hopefully parents can get back in the school building to volunteer next year. It's so important to watch the teacher in action. It will help you build trust of the situation. Your child may surprise you. And this happens to me all the time with my own kids. I'll talk to their teachers and I'm like, who are you talking about? Like, I don't know that kid. That kid does not act like that at the dinner table. But I wholeheartedly trust that that's happening. There's something, I know that there's something about the structure, the social demands in that situation, or my child is rising to the occasion. And my question is, how'd you get them to do that? I need to be able to do that at dinner, so get curious and say, oh, so this works at home, or have a teacher say this works at school. My main question for everyone is what's working and why is it working? And if we could always start there instead of what's the concern, what's going wrong, what's hard. We're all here because it's hard, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. What is working? And it could be, my child is getting out of the car in the morning and that's what's working. And that's all that's working. And from there, it's hard. Well, let's start there, so there's always somewhere to start. And I know someone listening is probably like, well, my child won't get out of the car in the morning, and I have been there. Yes, so, there are all kinds of things to problem solve, but we have to stay open and curious with each other.
So I'm hearing that collaboration, that approaching, for parents to approach it by working on regulating and managing their own fears and anxieties, and then approaching the team with collaboration, with curiosity. And I will just give the caveat here, because certainly some of you listening have attempted all that. Like, there's certainly, after doing this work for 25 years, I know that there are situations that are not salvageable. There are some of you working with teachers, principals, systems, whatever, where it doesn't matter how you approach it, it is not going to be workable. And the best thing you can do is figure out how to get your child in a different situation or whatever. Certainly there are those situations, but I find the vast majority of the time, as you're talking about, Emily, when we can approach this collaboratively with curiosity, even like I'll sometimes have parents that I work with, I'll have them say, I think it'd be helpful for you to just acknowledge to your child's classroom teacher that this is hard. Like, just say, listen, I get it. my kid is not an easy kid a lot of days.
Right.
He struggles with X, Y, and Z. Boy, I can really relate. Here's some of the things that I feel at home as her parent, and just that's a way of building connection and trust. And often then that helps the teacher, like it brings their guard down a bit. It's like, oh, she sees me. That mom sees me in how hard this is. And also now I can see her because God, I'm thinking about what it would be like to have this kid the other 18 hours of the day at home. Like these are hard things. These are wonderful, amazing children that sometimes it's just really hard. And I think just to acknowledge that to each other can go a long way in bringing understanding and a willingness to collaborate.
Yeah. And just, small things like sharing a picture of your child on vacation with the teacher, and schools are doing, a great job with technology and apps that, still let teachers have boundaries, but that they can send pictures of a child working or making a friend or, doing something that the teacher knows is a big deal for that child. And then the parent says, they get it. They took a picture of that because they understand that that's a big deal. And it's all out of the connection and the communication of the parent and the teacher understanding where the child's skills are so that when they surprise us or move forward, everyone's excited about it. And we get to come together and celebrate with the child and say, you did it. And we're all super excited. And then to figure out, okay, why did that work and how can we replicate it?
Yeah. So just like we want our children to feel safe and supported and connected in school, we have to do our role as parents to make sure that we're cultivating a sense of felt safety and connection with the educators working with them in order to move forward. So many important things we've covered here. I know we have to wrap up. I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more, because you referenced a couple of amazing resources you have. I know you've got so many great charts and things you put on social and handouts and like all this stuff. And you're working on a program for educators around these things. So please tell everybody how they can get more of Dr. Emily in their life.
Thank you. So you can just go to learnwithdremily.com and you'll find resources there for parents and teachers. I have a course for parents that's most appropriate for parents kind of right after the diagnosis of understanding, like, how do you read through that report? Shifting your mindset from a traditional approach to parenting this child right in front of you, and answering lots of questions about who are all these players and kind of the therapy world and what all that is. And then I am working on a course for teachers that my plan is to offer it as a self-paced course during the school year, and then to have a program with live sessions with me that'll be coming next summer, because teachers need community. And that course will also have a private Facebook group so teachers can share stories and strategies with each other. So that will be called the Neurodiverse Classroom. And you can find more about it at learnwithdremily.com. And if you're interested in downloading the regulation roster, it's free at learnwithdremily.com/roster. And once you download that, you'll be on my list to receive things so you won't miss anything with that.
Fantastic. And I know I want you to get your Instagram handle too.
Oh yeah. So
I think it's Insta. Is Insta the place that you're most
mostly
mainly
Instagram and Facebook. For both, I'm at Emily W. King, PhD.
Great, good, because I definitely want people to find you there. You post great stuff. So thank you for all of the work you're doing in this area and really for the passion you bring to it. There's not a lot of people in our fields who are really passionate about this piece, and yet it is a piece that parents and kids are struggling with day in and day out all year long. So thank you for your passion and your work around that. And thanks too for connecting today to share all of it with us.
Yes, thanks for having me and for lifting up this topic.
Awesome. And thanks as always to all of you for being here and for listening. We'll catch you back here next time.